One. Hi everyone. Today we have the wonderful Dr. Craig Weiner. He's a chiropractor, a body worker, an EFT matrix reimprinting and META Health practitioner. Hi Craig, how are you?
Hi, Avnita. It's wonderful to be here.
We're so happy to have you. And if people are joining, please do let us know that you can hear us and the sound's okay. So tell me,
Please,
Craig.
please do, because an interview without being able to hear or see us just is not as much fun, is it?
You know, I've run into problems, so I'm not that great with these systems, but I'm learning. So thank you for being patient. Tell me, Craig. So how did you get to where you are? We're very interested in this mind-body healing.
Well, my mother and father, they got together about 58 years ago and had a vision for something. I was a first child. Um, I've been interested in healing my whole life. Um, I began actually with the kind of hands-on healing as being a massage therapist back when I was like in my early 20s. That led me to loving working with people and physical challenges and pain. And then I decided I wanted more education. So I became a chiropractor. So that was postgraduate work. I got my doctorate of chiropractic in California, and that was almost 30 years ago. I'd say under the aegis, under the umbrella of being a chiropractor, I've studied, all kinds of physical healing, but also, my personal interest in psychological, emotional, energetic, spiritual healing has taken me in a lot of different directions, as it does so many people. And so about 12 years ago now, I think 12, 13 years ago, I started hearing about this thing called EFT online, maybe even longer now. And to be honest, I was thoroughly skeptical. There's no way that everything I was reading, that somehow tapping on your face could fix everything from broken relationships and healing physical illness to et cetera, psychological illness, et cetera. So I pretty much just wrote it off and ignored it for about 2 years, just being highly skeptical about it. I had kind of a scientific mindset. And there was just an opening in my life that basically said, you know what, you really don't know much about that. And I was pretty open to most other things. So I decided to find out a little bit more. And I was putting on interview presentations at my office. And so we called them transformational dialogues. And I decided to challenge myself to something new. And I said, you know what, there's that EFT thing, but I really don't know much about it. So I looked online to see if I could find somebody that lived in my area. And I live on a small island in the Pacific Northwest. And there was one person that did this tapping thing. And so I invited her and said, would you like to give a presentation? I could interview, I can find out more about it, but would you mind coming to the office first and telling me more about it? So I felt okay about it. And she did an exercise and she did some tapping with some of my staff. And I was very intrigued. It's like, okay, this is interesting. Let's do this presentation. And it was a transformational dialogue. Her name was Alina Frank. And I ended up studying EFT, marrying her, changing my life, becoming an EFT trainer, and one thing led to another. So it's a longer story, but basically there was the marriage of my long history with a very physical, chiropractic, hands-on kind of practice, and then Alina really brought her world of EFT. They merged. I started assisting her. I started teaching. I became a practitioner, and now I've been practitioner, trainer for quite, the last 8 to 10 years, and love it. And I just love this work. I love where it takes people. I love being a part of it. And so there's kind of a synopsis story. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So that's how you met Alina,
Mm-hmm.
and you work closely with her, I know.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've got, there's an echo all of a sudden. Am I the only one? Sarah's saying. Yeah, please do let us know if the sound's not great, because I have heard from others that the sound's fine. So, it's nice to know. Thank you. So tell me more about how you see, mind body with working in our physical illnesses, how powerful it is, or how do you see it all connecting together, traditionally we work, people will work with physical symptoms in a physical way, but you're more drawn to the mind-body healing side. So how does all that fit in your life? Do you feel that everything's connected? I often ask this question, do you feel like health, relationships and wealth is all connected, like we're all connected, all these things going on? How do you feel about all of that?
I feel you're right. That's how I feel. It's not.
Would you tell me I'm wrong? Would you tell me I'm wrong?
I would politely disagree.
I hope so.
So what I would say is, there's no doubt about it for me, on my personal life and my clients. And really, I think that the majority of the world now no longer belongs to a Cartesian mindset where the mind and body are separate, because, the moment that I think anybody that's listening feels anything that they're concerned about in their body, immediately ensuing that are going to be thoughts and worries about that, and feelings associated with that, and decisions and behaviors revolved around that. And so the moment that you start to have physical ill health, poor health, etc., you've already got a mind-body connection following that pathway. And most people understand that. If you're feeling poorly or have a disease or have pain, do you have any feelings or thoughts about that? I don't think anybody can say no. So then the more interesting question then becomes, can feelings and thoughts lead to physiological changes? And there's really no doubt about that, because all we have to do is look to the thousands and thousands, the plethora of studies that show stress related to hypertension and so many other physical illnesses and disease and heart disease, et cetera, that, it's almost like, why are we even having this conversation? It's so obvious. And it's really so well-grounded in the research. So for me, the question that we never know is, if somebody presents with a physical issue, concern, illness, symptom, etc., diagnosis, I kind of look at it as a pie chart. What percentage of that is physiological or anatomic? What percentage of that is emotional? What percentage of that is energetic? What percentage of that? And I don't know, maybe someday there'll be like some scientific machine that will come up with, that's 30% this. But the truth is that as soon as something becomes psychological and emotional, it has a physiological and anatomic correlate. Because as soon as you have feelings of fear and worry, you're already changing your heart rate. You're already changing brain waves. You're already changing. So they're so immediate. I'm careful about the discussion of causality. In other words, did this worry cause this condition? Did this condition cause this worry? So, I think we need to be sensitive about the topic, or at least I do as a physician practitioner, et cetera, because it's so easy for people to take on responsibility, not like responsibility, but as in blame and self-blame for having created this, et cetera. So the discussion about this, I'm always sensitive to who I'm speaking with, how they perceive it. So it's a great discussion, and I'm just careful with how I voice it, depending on who I'm talking to and what role I'm playing, etc.
Yeah, but I think, if I may just add this in, that I understand you're saying that you have to be careful with what you're saying and sensitive, because it's where the person's at. And you're absolutely right not to blame. But I see it the other way as well, that it means that we can, if we're creating problems with subconsciously, not doing it deliberately, of course, that means it gives us the chance to uncreate it. And that's the bit I love, that providing we do step by step, slowly and slowly, and not blame ourselves and be then unkind. I think there's a chance for everybody in everything.
Well, I think finding metaphors and ways of bringing up this conversation that are palatable and acceptable can work, because then there's a readiness and a willingness to be able to hear that, right? So I think how we word it is just helpful. So in other words, so for example, if somebody has, if somebody comes, so as a chiropractor, somebody comes into me for their back pain or their headaches or whatever, okay? So that if they do that, they may not be coming to me as an EFT practitioner, okay? And if they come to me to just work on the physical issue, they may not be recognizing there's an emotional aspect. You're going to excuse me. We have a puppy and there's a door that
Yeah,
opens.
I can hear.
Would you mind if I close that door and take a moment?
Go
You can
ahead.
check the questions and I'll be right back. I'm so sorry.
Bring her on. If you have any questions, please do write them down and I'll present them to Craig. He'll be happy to answer them while he tends to his dog, and he'll come back in a second.
I promise. I promise I So in other words, if somebody comes to me as an EFT practitioner to work with their physical condition or their chronic pain, etc., then there's already a willingness and openness to explore the emotions related to that, right? I mean, you're coming to an emotional freedom practitioner. So there's understanding that there's an emotional connection to the pain.
Right.
If somebody comes to me as a chiropractor, they're not necessarily coming to me with that in mind. They're coming to me to fix this and do that and rehabilitate that. So
Yes.
who I'm speaking to, I'll address the mind-body conversation and find out what their listening is at, and then find whatever metaphor or understanding to say, just like you said. If we can, have you noticed that when you've been under more stressful circumstances that the symptoms are worse? Oh yeah, so if they can notice that, then we can notice the flip side, just like you said. So that's all I was trying to say.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at some of the comments, getting an echo from Craig, not a matrix one. Haha. An echo on Craig's part.
Oh, we're not an echo on the volume, an echo in the matrix. Okay. Interesting. Okay.
I think they mean it seriously, a little bit of an echo on the sound, but that's okay. Maybe next time I'll ask guests to put...
well, I can do that.
Oh, yeah, can you put your headset on, see if that makes a difference? I'll put mine on too. So,
Let's do a sound check. Is that better?
I'm going to have to put my volume down, otherwise it's going to be very, very loud for my ears.
Check, sound check. Look.
Is that
okay?
That's great. So if people can let us know about any echoes and things, please, that'd be great. So I find, Craig, that even though people can say that, yes, my pain's worse when I'm stressed, or symptoms get worse, whatever, I find still they can't see the connection between the two and how intricately there's that relationship between the mind and the body. They still see it as separate. And I think it's got a lot to do with how we address physical symptoms, that we immediately think there's something wrong with us, whereas to you and me, it comes naturally. There's something's gone on, and let's rewind it. Where did it start? Let's work out the emotions, the beliefs, but I feel that I find it's a hard sell.
Well, I think it has to be a step-by-step sell, because you and I can go right there, but others aren't there yet. So I find incremental progress useful and palatable and digestible, so to speak, one step at a time. So, for example, when I'm working with a client, especially with tapping and matrix, I'm very conscious in setting small step goals, because I want them really? They get that, they feel that, they have that difference, they're able to do that. Wow, look at that. But if we set the goal of making this pain go away, it's too far. It's like running a marathon. Right. And it's too far getting there. But if we achieve this, and then we achieve this, and then they're able to do this, they're able to manage this by themselves, they notice after a session that they're feeling better. So I agree with you that just as I, at one point, was very skeptical that EFT could accomplish this or that, I had to have my own experiences. So, a good story I've shared before is my first real personal experience with EFT, when I saw, was a time when I had come in from the yard, bent over in pain, and I had strained my back, and I had been working hard in the yard. And Alina and I were early on in our relationship, and she said, "Would you like to tap on it?" And I'm thinking in my head, this is not an emotional issue. This is a physical pain. I strained myself. I've been working for the last 2 days in the yard nonstop. I know what to do with that. I'm a chiropractor. I know how to take care of it. But at that point in the relationship, it would not have been a wise choice to say, no, I don't want to tap on this. It's not going to help me. It's not an emotional problem. So I reluctantly said, fine. fine, we can tap on it, whatever. And then I can go ice and take care of it. And as we're tapping, and I'm starting to realize that I'm annoyed that I'm having this pain. And then it starts becoming that I'm kind of angry that I have all this pressure that I've been having to have because I've been having to do all this work to sell this house, to do this, doing it all. And pretty soon I'm very angry. And another 10 minutes later, I didn't have any back pain.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it wasn't so brilliant because it was very confronting, because then I had to walk in the office on Monday and have no idea if the person walked in with back pain, if it was physical, if it was an anatomical injury, if it was emotional, and so for me, it was really that kind of eye-opening moment of it can be all of those, even though it looked very physical. You know, a person can walk in with an MRI or an X-ray and say, look, it's there. And I said, I know it's there. I'm not denying that it's there.
Yeah.
We're just not working with that part with their tapping because pain is experienced between here and here. Even if you have a cut here, the pain isn't being experienced here. The pain is being felt there, but it's actually being registered and interpreted here. So if we can affect the interpretation part, then you could still have this and not have pain, because pretty much everybody that's had an injury has had some times where the pain is worse than others. So it's always
Actually,
a scale, right?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, that it's still in your head, like, rather than, yeah.
So we're just working with the interpreter, right? And if we can change the interpreter, you can still have that, but not be in so much pain. Is that something you're interested in? I don't think I've ever had somebody say no. So, right?
But don't you think that people will fear that they'll carry on having like a physical issue and it will be detrimental to them unless they physically sort it out? Like I get these fears, I think, that I hear from people, that they'd rather sort it out like structurally or physically, because otherwise it's going on in the background. They're not noticing it because they've got no pain or symptoms.
I think that that's where it comes down to every person's, one person grew up the daughter of a medical doctor. So they've got a mindset and belief system. That's one way. I have another person that would never go to a medical doctor, and it's all energetic and it's all everything that way, and there's nothing physical, and I'm telling them they need to go see a medical doctor. So the listening in the headspace of a person is so individual. We have to listen to that and pay attention to that person's beliefs about that. And yes, somebody's scared, well, if it goes away and I don't feel it, then what if it just festers and I don't feel? Then we have to address that fear, right? So I mean, each of those are tappable issues from a tapping perspective. Yeah.
Craig, I find it fascinating. I think this is one of my favorite subjects, about beliefs, because it seems, and my understanding is that our beliefs create our reality. So as, like you're saying, you've brought in the beliefs part of it. How I find this fascinating, that everything we believe about our bodies, we can work on and then create something else. It's a tremendous area, isn't it, to look into, because it's almost like you can't sometimes do it because you're in it. You're in this reality, which is actually can be called an illusion as well, but you can manipulate it to your advantage. But sometimes it's hard because you believe it to be true, and then these become your truths. And to this day, I haven't actually figured out what's really real, and what's a belief. And nobody's ever come up with this answer, except that in the end it comes to, well, maybe it's just an illusion.
It's funny because early in my relationship with Alina, this was a common discussion, and I made a bumper sticker that she had on her car for years, and it said, "And it all seems so real." And the idea that you can start, it's a huge topic, but
it's huge.
My experience in teaching and training practitioners about working with the power of a person's beliefs is that when we have a core limiting belief, like this disease runs in my family, right? And there's factual data about that, right? In other words, my mother, you can't deny the reality of that fact, per se, that my mother had it, my grandmother had it, or great-grandmother had it. Okay, that's true. However, there's also, when we have a belief, it also generates experiences that are consistent with that belief. So a hard-worn belief isn't a belief to the person, it's a fact to the person, right? So we have to understand that for them, it's a fact. Until we start to break that up a little bit and they have experiences that invalidate that belief and they have something to show them otherwise. Otherwise, there's no reason they should believe you when all of their experiences say it's like this. Okay? Until there's a first woman in the family that doesn't have it, or until somehow this is disproven, there needs to be some opening for them to create a new belief, whatever, whether it's through EFT, matrix, some real life, whatever. So, I have to honor the validity of their experience that's saying, yes, I understand that that's true for you. And I understand that you've had 1,000 experiences that validate that. What if there was the possibility that one time it could not happen that way? So somehow you've got to find your window in, because there's also what's called secondary gains. In other words, I've so believed this for so long that the fear that I'm wrong about it brings up a whole nother, what does my reality do if all of a sudden this isn't true? My whole life's been a lie? You mean I've lived with this and I've created it? So these are all, complicated, complex human being constructs for how we think about our lives and how we think about what we do. And that, for me, the body is like a dashboard. It's simply the dashboard about underlying things that show up on the dashboard to alert us to things. So, if you're driving your car and the red light goes off that says that you're low on brake fluid, right? That's useful information. So that's often where I use that analogy a lot, something like that, to say, don't you want to know that your brake fluid is almost empty so you don't crash? And they're like, well, of course I do. I said, that's just a light flashing you, telling you. So when symptoms show up in the body, that's a light telling you something's off. Don't you want to know that? And they're like, well, I guess so, but I don't like it. I said, I get you don't like it. I get it. It's painful. I get all of that. But don't you want to know if something was off so that you could take some corrective action? So a lot of times stories or thinking about things in another way help people to go, well, I guess, because for me, healing happens, or for it to happen, it's enhanced by a mental construct that says, maybe my body is trying to tell me something. Mm-hmm. And that's often where I'll start tapping work. It's like, if your body, let's just imagine that your body is trying to offer something useful rather than attacking you. If it was trying to teach you something, if it was trying to show you something, if it had something to tell you, what do you think it might be trying to tell you? And I always use the information that comes from that person's own interpretation rather than my interpretation. But that's always more valuable.
Yeah, I think it helps them if they make that realization, because it's come from them then, really. That's really interesting. Thank you. So tell me about some of your weird case studies where maybe things shouldn't have worked and they did. It could be just not necessarily health, but anything, abundance, relationships, all that's interesting too, because I find it's incredible how everything's connected. Sometimes you just...
Yeah. I think I did just to make that connection, because that was kind of a big leap in a different direction, and yet it's not. Right? On one hand, somebody could be listening and go, wait a minute, we're just talking about health. What do you mean? Why'd you just throw in relationship or money?
Sorry. Yeah, that's true. I suppose so.
But the segue is often the same beliefs and themes. If I don't feel capable of healing, if I don't feel worthy of healing, if I have guilt or shame, etc., those same themes aren't going to just show up with my health. To me, our health and our bodies is kind of like universe, God, whatever, universal way of hitting us over the head and getting it close to home. Because that we pay attention to more than anything, right? But those same themes can show up in the world is a dangerous place. The same themes can show up with, fears about being able to, the metaphors are fascinating. Language is fascinating. Mm-hmm. And often a client will talk about a pain, a body part, whatever it is that's happening in their body. And it's fascinating when they're talking about that they're having, esophageal reflux, and they start talking about, I just can't accept, I just can't swallow the fact that my son is never talking to me ever again. I can't accept. right? And they'll use words that they don't even hear metaphorically, often common. And again, it's their language that they use it. It's just like, I'm just having a hard time putting myself out there, having a hard time stepping out and finally taking that first step toward creating my new life. And meanwhile, their knee pain and their ankle pain is metaphorically so aligned with that. So bodies and metaphor, but it also might show up that my inability to step out in my business, my inability to step out and stand on my own 2 feet in my relationship, ends up correlating with the physical pain in their hips, their knees, etc.
Yeah.
So so when one starts to look with the underlying emotional and energetic themes, it's not a big stretch to go, how is that theme, how is that belief, how is that that view of the world, that world view, showing up in your body, but also showing up in your business or in your relationship, or your lack in deserving to have abundance, etc. So when we start to, for you and I, this is easy, and it's like, of course, it's evident. But many other people haven't made those connections. So when we start to ask them questions, that they start to make the connections, you can literally watch the light bulbs going in. It's like, wow, I never put that together, but it is the same feeling, isn't it? Like, I can't fix this knee and it's helpless, and I'm feeling that same feeling of helpless with my child or my parent or whatever it is. And they start to see that theme across multiple arenas of their life. And I see that all the time. I see that in, so I'm also a META Health practitioner, and it's just another type of analysis based on German New Medicine, where there's an even deeper understanding or perspective and detective work on making the kind of emotional root cause connection to different conditions.
Yeah.
And so I have to be careful, because while I might have ideas about what something means in somebody's body and what it's connected to, I'm careful to not insert that. Because I think it's always more valuable for the realizations and the connections to come from a person by me asking questions and getting curious and playing detective work, than me saying, oh, well, your left elbow, you know what that means. So when would, and I don't agree with that perspective, or that perspective doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah, I'm the same, actually. I just I inquire and listen. I hope I do anyway.
Which is an important part right there, right? For anybody that's suffering, just to be heard and held space and held a safe space. I mean, I teach practitioners about trauma, and for me, probably half. People might not want to say this because they think it's all about the technique, but I think half of what we do is holding a safe space for a client to be able to be okay with whatever they're experiencing and feeling, and being able to be heard and feeling safe within that, I think, is half the battle. So, we can bring all these techniques and all this huge body of knowledge, and yet the skill of being able to create a safe space for somebody to be okay with who they are within what they're feeling, etc., is a huge piece.
For sure. And I think that validation, like you said, being have that safe space, being heard, it's it's incredible. And people don't often get that. Sometimes even from family and friends, like they not able to open up. So it's it's definitely needed. Actually, I want to ask you, Dr. Weiner. I have a question from Laura Osorio Hernandez. She said she's done mind-body healing, and she's had some progress, but not able to point what the reason behind the pain has been. So how should she get to the root of it? What do you think?
Well, let me tell you. No, I can't do that. But I'll make suggestions. So, for example, number one is she's done mind-body things. That can mean anything and everything, and I have no idea what her experience of things she's tried is. It also depends on the techniques, the practitioners, a million things. And so if I had to give a generic answer that might be helpful, the best that I could do is part of the questions that I would ask her if she were sitting in front of me. And first, I would be tapping on and working with the emotions that she has about that as a first layer, because whatever you have, the anger, the frustration, etc., all keep the cycle in play, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, from a tapping perspective, I'd be working kind of, I guess I'll speak of kind of the layers. And the first layer would start to be to diminish the intensity of the animosity or the frustration or the anger, or all the different emotions that one might have about having that condition, right? Next layer, I would say, would then be starting to look at, okay, how can I start to align or be in partnership with this about my body, and look through the eyes of maybe it's doing the best that it can. And actually, by being symptomatic, whatever the problem is, by existing, it's actually there for a purpose, that it's trying to teach me something or show me something or have me change something. And so, however mind body approach you use, whether you're using tapping or meditation or any body talk or any variety of techniques, how can I start to be in a place of curiosity about, I wonder how I could hear what it has to say, and how can I enter into some sort of dialogue with it and go, okay, all right, fine. I don't really like you. I wish you weren't here, but maybe you're here to show me something that I need to stop doing, or to have me finally make a change that I need to. So what is it that you're feeling? Are you feeling left out? Are you feeling unheard? What are the emotions that you have? What are you trying to show? So getting curious is always a more useful place than the intense negative emotions that often we have about our suffering.
Yeah, that's great. So I hope that helps you, Laura. I'm sure you can also give Dr. Weiner your more in depth about your case, and I'm sure he'll reply. So make sure to reach out to him. Okay, so I've lost my train of thought. What was I going to say?
That's okay.
Read my mind.
Okay, I'll pretend like I know. So, was there another question that you were going to read?
What's another question that I was going to read?
Question? Maybe that's what you were going to. I have no
idea. Perhaps share some stories or some more inspiring things that you've done for people, and we've heard about your own back pain, and I know that you work at you're training other practitioners, so you're a trainer. You're not just helping people. You train practitioners. That's woo.
So Alina and I have been EFT and matrix reimprinting trainers for many years together. We run a school, and so we teach in the United States, Canada, Australia, and now a lot of our trainings are online. And so we teach foundational people how to become EFT practitioners, right? And we mentor them, go through certification. We're affiliated with EFT International and Matrix Reimprinting, EFT MRA. So a lot of my time is spent these days with practitioners that are learning how to do this with other people. Now, I see EFT as having kind of two places. One is as a self-help technique, right? So how would you use tapping, for example? The last person that asked that question, for starting to tap on releasing the emotions and tapping into the curiosity, so we can use those things to get curious and to start to work on ourselves. But then, many of the physical illnesses began with adverse or traumatic events, right? Bad stuff that happened to us, right? And we can all imagine what bad stuff could have happened to us, because many of us have had bad stuff happen to us, some worse than others. But when we start to work with trauma has a profound effect on the mind and body, and it's held very differently. As Bessel's Demagogue's book says, the body keeps the score. So we hold things somatically in our body. One could get angry at that, or one could say, yeah, it's holding onto it so that we don't forget, so that we don't put ourselves in that situation again on a somatic, subconscious level, not physical choice, or not consciously. So in a sense, our body often holds on to things because our body is wired for survival. And our body doesn't want to have experience, but the duality of that is, until it's healed and released, we do it over and over again. So it's an interesting conundrum, right? So we call it the compulsion to repeat the trauma and do the same thing over and over again, despite us not wanting to. So it's an interesting split there. But what I wanted to say about that is that when we're working with the origins of illness, It often begins with trauma. And I don't believe that the safest way to handle trauma is handling and tapping on our own traumas. Because no, that's like me falling off the boat and splashing around in the storm, in the waves. Somebody's got to hold that lifeboat still for me to climb back in and start to dry off and get stable again. So being able to work on one's own traumas, I'm not a big supporter of unless you're very skillful and knowledgeable. So I just want to stress that there are ways that you can use many of these techniques, and there are many of self-help things you can do, including EFT as a self-help measure. And there are many different mind-body techniques you can do. But when digging deeper, when there's an underlying traumatic origin that kick things off to get started, that working with a skilled practitioner becomes really imperative and very important.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
I didn't
great point.
I didn't want to forget that.
No.
You had asked the story. It reminded me of, from a mental health perspective, people, when they get skin conditions, for example, commonly have underlying traumatic origins because the skin is very much about contact and touch, right? It's a big sensory organ. And so when people start having things like psoriasis and a variety of other skin conditions, often when it began on an emotional level, kind of the seed began when there was a conflict around either touch that wasn't wanted or touch that was wanted and not received. So I was just thinking of one, and that's a thematicness. Again, I don't say that, but I listen for people's stories, and it helps me to understand, and then perhaps go there more directly when the time is ready with the client. And this one, the person had skin condition their whole life, and where it ended up leading back to was the person was a preemie, and the first almost 2 weeks of life was not touch. She was in an incubator, right? So there was a lack of maternal contact and touch.
Yeah.
That's obviously usually profound for a newborn infant, right? So it's just an example. And then when things get stirred up at different, because most conditions spike and they go up and down in various degrees, they have triggers, etc. So then we look for uncovering the themes for what are the themes of either exacerbation or healing that happen in a person's life that are connected through that theme of how they feel about either not wanting to be touched or needing to be touched, and then getting triggered by not getting touched, or the resentment, or choosing to not be in a position to not feel vulnerable, to not want to be touched. So, these are kind of the emotional threads that work through a lifetime that end up showing up as a physical manifestation of pain or anything else. But the underlying current of which, the floats are floating on are the emotional aspects, and then the cognitive decisions and beliefs that get created accordingly.
Fascinating. Thank you. Yeah. It's it truly is fascinating that you can just work on underlying emotions and beliefs and repetitive thought patterns, and then get a result like on a physical level. That's just it's miraculous. Almost.
It is, and if we just look at it as a continuum, I look at the energetic. I think you can get physical healing without believing in energy, but I do believe that there's an energetic level, there's an emotional and psychological level, there's a denser physical level, okay? And, one of the most powerful things, so as a chiropractor, I would always ask a patient, okay, so what happened? Did you lift something? Did you, what? So I'd always be inquiring, trying to find out what they might have done that might have caused their pain. And often, more often than I'd like to say, I slept wrong. Nothing. I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Which, as a chiropractor early on in my career, was very frustrating. Like, it was very easy if somebody said, well, I lift this heavy box, or I was in this car accident, or et cetera. It's like, okay, great. Now I can put aside, check the box that says we understand the cause of this. But it really wasn't until I became an EFT practitioner and trainer that really I started to get more curious and said, okay, I hear that. I hear, you slept wrong. So apparently you slept differently last night than you have the last 64 years of your life. So clearly something must have been very odd about your sleeping last night. Or, so I'm just curious, what either has changed in your life? What's been stressful about you? What's been going on in your life outside of this? Maybe even not just yesterday, but maybe over the last month or two, even up to 6 months before this happened. I'm like, well, that doesn't have anything to do with my neck pain. I'm like, well, just humor me. I'm just curious. What? Oh, you mean like me losing my job and my wife divorcing me and my kids saying that they would never talk to me again? Yeah, something like that. And I'm sure that had no effect on you whatsoever. Yeah, but
Yeah.
that didn't cause my neck pain. So
Yeah.
when the more that I do this, the more my questions get simpler and almost more childlike. Like, I'm just wondering, what's it like to be you, and what's it been like to be you for the past few months? What's that been like? And rather than think I have to know the answer and figure it out, I now ask more questions for the client to start to put the puzzle together.
Mm.
And then we work together with resolving it and working through it and releasing it. And they start to see, the thoughts, the emotional connections, the beliefs, when else in their life they may have had that same pattern, even if it hadn't showed up in their back, but it was still a similar pattern. Patterns are everything, right? Patterns, beliefs, because as a result of the beliefs, we create the patterns. As a result of the patterns, we have emotions and thoughts. And as a result of those, we end up getting physical related issues. And I'm always careful. I'm not going to say every physical illness is a result of a thought of a trauma, etc. But I see it so often that's my area. When I'm wearing my EFT or training hat, that's my avenue of exploration with them. Right? If I'm working online, I'm not acting as their chiropractor. Right? Or
So Alina she definitely changed you, right? She converted you.
She had a profound influence, and so Alina's specialty is actually her work. So she was a doula before, and her work and her book is about sexual trauma. And the profundity, the profoundness of how sexual trauma has an effect on people's lives physically, not just reproductive health, but on almost anything, and how it shows up in a person's business and not just relationship, etc. So, so the role of trauma having its ripple effects on everything is tremendous. And I think, we're cutting edge. I want to say we're living in a world that's so we're living in a powerful time in which we can talk about trauma now, and it's more understood than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, a trauma was like a car accident or the intensive care unit of a concussion or something like that.
Yeah.
And now we can speak about adversity or trauma, and most people have a sense of what trauma informed means, which means the repercussions of who we are and how we see the world and what we think we can have or not have or heal from or not heal from. The direct repercussions from trauma are tremendous, and people are starting to have an understanding about how that affects us on an individual, on a community level, etc.
You pointed out we'll start wrapping up soon because I've had you on this on the live for about 45 minutes. Actually, you mentioned having trauma, and you mentioned like divorce and kids not talking, like big traumas, but sometimes it can be small traumas, but the values are quite high for the person, so they value certain things, and it can be just a small thing. Maybe it's a child, the mother's taking the lollipop away and giving it to the sister, or something tiny, but because they value it, and then that can also hit, and they have an adverse effect. You must see that obviously all the time too.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of somebody I was working with recently, and the power of a moment was with her siblings, and one of the client was starting to speak about what their concern was, and etc. And basically the parent said, no, not you, the other, right? Or so, and it began a pattern of what I have to say isn't important in the world, and what I have to say doesn't really matter, and the repercussions of that throughout a lifetime are tremendous. See, we talk about often small T, little T, and big T traumas. Big T traumas are the ones that most people will understand. You know what I mean? So we teach a course called Tapping Out of Trauma, and it's for tapping practitioners to deepen their understanding of trauma and working with trauma. And so for that, big T traumas are when there is real threat to your well-being. It's a car accident. It's a fall. It's an earthquake. It's a mugging. It's a physical attack. It's, all of those things in which my well-being is truly threatened. Okay. And those have tremendous repercussions. But little T traumas are the felt experience of being threatened, even if they truly weren't be, because it threatens my ability to be loved. It threatens my perception that who I am is worthwhile. A little child that goes up to the blackboard and gets made fun of and, and has an accident in their pants, that can have repercussions just as strong as having been in a fire, because who they see themselves to be at that point out of not worthy or not smart enough or not good enough or whatever affects everything in their life. Those core limiting beliefs affect everything. So yes, most people, if you ask them, just like Gary Craig, the founder of EFT, said, if you're doing your own work and I tell somebody to list their traumas, they'll say, well, I had one or two or three or four. And they'll say, okay, let's do this another way. Please list all the things, life experiences you wish that you really could have skipped. Okay, now we start to have a list because we belittle our traumas through an adult perspective. Other people have had them worse. It wasn't that bad, but we forget what it was like to be 4 years old and experience that. From a 40-year-old body, it's like, whatever. It was a little thing at the pool that day. But through the 4-year-old, it was life ending. It was, I can't, so it was so big at that time, given their capacity. So yes, we often belittle our childhood experiences because through the adult brain, adult eyes, they don't seem threatening to us now. But our capacity to experience them was very different, and our perceptions were very different when we were younger than when we were grown up.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's wonderful. I'll just see if other people have got any questions. If you have questions, we'll just take a couple, and we'll start to close up soon. Do you have anything else you just want to share with us before we finish the webinar?
Well, I just don't know from people that are listening. I imagine that there are people that are everything from somewhat familiar to the things we've been talking about to not familiar. But, the beauty of EFT is to be able to start to widen our window of tolerance so that we can literally be open and ourselves and flexible and grounded and whole in the greatest variety of circumstances, so that we keep pushing our boundaries of possibility open, right? The matrix reimprinting part, which is, an advancement and building on EFT, what it does so beautifully and gently is creatively work with those younger selves, as somebody said that goes earlier, to be able to really hone in on when those beliefs got created that rule our lives. And most of us don't know that our beliefs are ruling our lives. I mean,
True.
You and I
Absolutely.
this may be common language for us, but most people haven't yet had the opportunity to really view through that lens until they do. That it's almost like, I have the button set on my radio, I have the button set on my life for I can do this and I can't do this. I'm smart enough to do this, but not achieve that. That's possible. I could be rich or I could never because money is bad. So we, have these preset stations that we develop that are passed on intergenerationally, that are passed on by our parents, that are passed on through our childhood, especially. And those form the wiring of the push buttons on our radio, for those old people that know, like push buttons on the car radio, that those are the preset stations, and we don't tend to go in between, and we just stick to those stations. And so part of the discovery and the uncovering of this work is starting to realize those are push buttons. Maybe nobody told you that there's a whole bunch of various stations that are in between those preset stations that you just don't get to experience very often because you didn't even know they really were there, or it didn't feel okay or safe, etc. So, I guess what I want to leave with as we wind down, unless there are other questions, is this work is powerful, and it's like a rabbit hole that, like, once you start it, it just goes ever deeper. And that once you start to get an experience that it's safe to go down this rabbit hole, and you start to get experiences that start to show life changing, the serendipitous experiences that are all of a sudden feel a bit magical and like, whoa, this is a little weird, starts warping your reality a little bit, starts becoming a little bit of mystical, a little bit spiritual, a little bit of accidents and serendipitous things happening more and more often. It's addictive. Like, why wouldn't I want to live that way?
True.
Right? I mean, I live here on an island watching whales and eagles go by, and that's my life. And I say that not from an egotistical way in any means, but, and that's funny. And now, for the first time, I just noticed a card that's actually sitting here on my wife's desk, and it says, "You are magical."
Oh.
I literally hadn't even like put my eyes on that until just that moment. Perfect. That starts to become more of one's life and one's expectation. Once one starts to expect life to look more like that, it does.
That's
it's not
beautiful.
even surprising, right? So, but it's not necessarily just a quick one jump. It's a process, right? So we have to be careful about judging and, oh, my life's not like that. It could never be like that. Well, one step at a time, it can become.
That's it. Yeah, I totally agree. And I love that you've said that we can expand our possibilities. We can start becoming more limitless, just trying, one step at a time. I think that's beautiful. And it's available to all of us. It's not that available to the lucky few. We can all have love and wealth and health, if we try in baby steps, from where we are to working through our issues. I think that's
where we are
beautiful.
Is different based on where we started. I think to not speak to the moment that we're in right now culturally during a time of racial justice finding and Black Lives Matter, and so much right now where people have begun with their hands tied behind their back in many ways. And so some of us begin here, and some of us have a starting place here, and some of us begin with this back here. And so I just want to say that this can look not just lovely, but like that's not for me, or that's not possible for me. So we always have to honor where people are beginning their journey, and just say, there's always whatever the next step is for you. Just if when you're in suffering, you can't hear about joy. It's hard. It's hard. It doesn't resonate at all. But you can hear about a little less suffering, right? So I think that we're all where we are. This might feel like pie in the sky, and I get that. But there's always a next step of healing. That I know 100%. There's always whatever our next step is.
Yeah.
And once we have that next step, we start to build a little bit more resilience and a little bit more possibility consciousness for maybe 2 steps forward. And that we all have access to.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much, Dr. Weiner. It's such a pleasure to have you and share your knowledge, and you live the, you walk the talk. So that's it's fabulous. Thank you so much. So we'll say goodbye to Dr. Weiner. I don't think we've got any more questions, but we've had lots of people listening in.
Yeah, if they want to
and that's
contact me,
fabulous.
can I just give some contact information?
Please, absolutely. And, just put things on. I'll, write the post up probably tomorrow because it's evening here. And then tomorrow or the next day when I get around to it. But if you can put your links, how people can contact you, and, we'll be in touch, and you can write your programs, how they can join you, because you're a trainer, and I'm sure everybody wants to hear more from you. Jean-Paul has said, this has been fantastic. Thank you both so much. So that's it's an absolute pleasure, and really to grace our space. That's wonderful, Dr. Weiner. And Kazia says, thank you very much, Craig. Like always, great and a very professional teaching. Thank you, Avnita, for inviting us. That's lovely. Okay, then. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Craig.
Bye-bye, Avnita.
Bye-bye.